Incorporated?
When you get to the Cranberry Bog, you
Oh no,
run
it's
for
a
your
new
objective
game.
and hope that not that much gets in your way. So all of that is about making each area
Gameplay.
distinct, unique, and much more difficult. Or, at the bare minimum, in need of a specialised approach beyond shoot all the things with my highest damage gun. And while we're talking about the map, I did have one other idea. This one's a bit extreme, and I don't think it would necessarily work, but still. We could Morrowindify Fallout 76. Kill the map. Compass markers at extreme short range only, no quest markers at all. So how would this sort of thing theoretically work? Well, let's take the final departure quest. In Flatwood, you get told to head north to the Morgantown airport. Well, you can use your compass to find north, like an actual compass is supposed to be used for, and then follow the road north out of town. On the way, look for road signs. Locations are actually very well signed in Fallout 76. And maybe once you get near to the location, you can have a quest marker to guide you to the exact right spot. This would of course need a total rewrite of much of the game's script and audio logs that pertain to quests, as now they need to give you instructions and directions you can follow. But what I like about this is it would encourage players to communicate. Because if you're not sure where something is, you'll need to ask other players for directions. This would also mean more players navigating by easy to follow routes, like roads and train lines, providing more high traffic areas to potentially set small camps up for people who want to try and trade. But most of all, it frees us from the tyranny of the quest marker, that little bastard that we have all spent far too many years running directly at. But to be honest, that one's more of a thought experiment. I think that might be going a bit far. Anyway, as for the map as we have it right now, I have visited, I believe, every location on the map solo, and played every event solo. And I don't recall any area or dungeon representing a major issue, aside from some lower level encounters where particularly large packs of super mutants stretch my ammo and explosive supplies events. In fact, to me, it feels like Bethesda pitched the difficulty quite low even in the later areas, to create an experience of broadly the same difficulty as, say, Fallout 4 on normal or hard. Now that's an acceptable difficulty when there's one human on the map and AI companions of variable usefulness, sitting on a sliding scale with Ian repeatedly murdering me with my own guns on one end and Craig bloody hell leave one for me Boone at the other. But for me, this low difficulty is connected to one of Fallout 76's biggest problems specifically as an online game. The players aren't having meaningful interactions with each other. If you really ramp up the difficulty, players are more likely to cooperate. Imagine a world where four low-level players join forces to try and cross the Savage Divide together. Imagine a world where there were roaming bands of enemies so tough and so numerous that cautiously scouting a new area was a good idea, and where you might decide that retreating or sneaking around an enemy group was the right idea, or an enemy force guarding an objective was so tough that one member acting as a decoy to draw off some of the enemy while the remainder stormed the back entrance together was the best bet, where stealth and silenced weapons were good ideas. In short, a world where running in all guns blazing only gets you so far, and where varied and creative tactics could work better. Of course, running in all guns blazing will always be a viable tactic when you can immediately respawn and rejoin the fight. So for death mechanics, I think that death should send you back to the last camp you visited, even if it wasn't yours, just the last time you encountered some form of civilization. And to work alongside that, I'd also add in some restrictions to make moving your camp around, and thus just summoning it to you, less viable, or at least more expensive, though I'll discuss that in detail later. I'm getting into specifics here. I want to get back to the wider points. If Fallout 76 is going to be an online multiplayer game, and it is, that's not going to change, then, like I've discussed, it's inevitable that Bethesda are going to want to make the game last a long time. That's just the model of these things. But when we take some of the conclusions and observations I've made so far together, we get a bit of a contradictory picture. I'd say it seems extremely likely that the game's junk economy has been modified to slow down progress, and yet game difficulty in general is quite low. Call me crazy, but why don't we just pull some of these levers in opposite directions and see if we end up with a more interesting experience? And this is where my version of Fallout 76 starts to come together. You see, I've already decided that weapon and armor maintenance consumes less junk, and the removal of leveled weapons reduces the need to craft. But remember, I've also taken some carry weight off you, so you won't be swimming in junk either. I just aim to slightly reduce the amount of looting needed to function effectively. So in terms of Fallout 76's length, I've just sped up the game pace by removing some of the grind. So now we pull the other lever, More enemies, more difficulty, some radically different challenges in each biome, calling for more preparation, more teamwork, better tactics. Okay, that's now slowed the game down again, but the key thing here is the substitution I just made. In my version of Fallout 76, you spend less time gathering junk, scrapping weapons, maintaining armor. In short, you spend less time looking at menus and running through low-level areas that have reliable junk. And I am very tired of running through Morgantown High School collecting plastic pumpkins. And instead, you're spending more time engaged in difficult fights, scouting out enemy position, modifying your loadout to suit the unique threat you're about to face. This strikes me as a simple choice. If you could choose between a game that takes a long time to complete because of grind, or a game that takes a long time to complete because of difficulty, which would you prefer? I'm oversimplifying here, of course. There's lots of decisions and creative methods to make a game last longer, and some of these are fairly simple conceptually, if not always easy to execute. Let me begin with a counterexample. Remember the combat zone in Fallout 4? It was actually in one of the game's trailers, with the player standing right in front of the cage, watching the fight. It looked like it might function like the Thorn in New Vegas, a place where you could go, bet on fights, maybe fight in the arena yourself. It looked cool and interesting, but that's not what happens in the game. People who dug around in the game files found unused areas and dialogue that clearly indicated it was supposed to work like that at one point, but for unknown reasons, it was cut before launch and never restored. Instead, you go in, everybody shoots at you, and you kill them. That's a wasted opportunity right there, where an area that could be something different and interesting instead just serves as another room full of raiders to shoot. Fallout 4 has a few of these unfortunately underutilized areas. The robot racetrack at Easy City Downs is a prominent example. But Fallout 76 is absolutely full of them. The gun range at Clarksburg doesn't function as a gun range. The Mistress of Mystery headquarters has a Batman training room that doesn't work. There's a water park with slides that you can't ride. White Springs features a golf course that you can't play golf on. There are multiple fairgrounds where you can't play any of the carnival games and none of the rides can ever be repaired, which is especially disappointing after Nuka Worlds. In a perfect world, these areas would do something. Gun ranges would feature competitive scorekeeping. Carnivals could be restored to working order. This represents a huge amount of ongoing work, of course, but it would make the world so much more interesting and distinct. And once players get used to the idea that areas hide these fun little extra secrets, people will explore more thoroughly, more slowly. It'll make the game last longer without having to resort to grinds. In fact, more generally, there are a lot of areas in Fallout 76 that feel underdeveloped. You see, I reckon there's a recipe for a decent Fallout area. It should be a visually distinct and interesting area, which offers 2 layers of storytelling and a reward for visiting it. What I mean is, Fallout locations have 2 lives. What was happening before the bombs fell, and what was happening immediately before you turned up today. And sometimes those 2 stories can interact. Take Helios 1 in New Vegas. The immediate story is that the NCR wants you to increase power output by fighting your way past some robots. The pre-war story, which you can entirely miss if you're rushing through, is that the building was designed to power a secret satellite weapon, which was being tested in front of military personnel shortly before the war. Dig into that, and one of the characters there today will reward you for covering up that fact. Or you can claim the weapon for yourself. 2 stories, layered on top of each other, interacting with each other in interesting ways, with a choice of rewards at the end depending on how you resolve the situation. Now this is an important bit of design, because a compelling story can make a small area really interesting, and encourage the player to explore it fully, to discover what's going on, or what did happen long ago. Now let me tell you the story of a location in Fallout 76, Barclay Spring. It's a town in the Mire. A decent-sized settlement with a large reservoir, a spa, a hotel, a building that looks like a castle, a town hall, a clinic, and various apartments. Naturally, I assumed that an area this size would have something interesting going on, so I started exploring, and I came across a few terminals. And very interestingly, 2 of them mentioned General Atomics robots strangely malfunctioning, and I also found some satellite dishes hidden around the town. Intriguing, I thought, a mystery to solve. What dastardly secret does this town hold? What experiment was being done? The answer's nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. The dishes are just there for the dropped connection event. If the event's live, you go up to them and you press A. And some robots just malfunctioned, I guess. It's not explained at all. But this all struck me as very weird at first, because a lot of effort has been put into this town. There are buildings with interiors that aren't used for anything, terminals and stories that don't go anywhere. It's just a really weirdly underutilized area, and it's not alone. There are a whole lot of areas that seem strangely empty when you find them, because of a slightly odd choice by Fallout 76, that if an area is the site of an event, a type of temporary quest that all players present can collaborate on, then that should be all that happens there. The problem with that design choice is it means 99% of the time, when the event isn't happening, these areas have nothing going on. And this affects a lot of areas. All of the Hornwright testing sites, the Voltec Agricultural Centre, all of the relay towers, the mine used in load bearing, the Landview Lighthouse, all of these areas are pretty much empty unless you happen to show up when the event is active. But new players have no way of knowing when they arrive at an area if it's an event site or not. They just see an uninteresting area with nothing going on. And that's a very bad thing, because if players start subconsciously expecting that there's a good chance there's no interesting story to uncover, they'll stop thoroughly exploring locations they come across and stop going out of their way to explore more of them. And that's really bad, because players should be immersed in the world, they should find compelling stories, and they should be rewarded for properly exploring the map. And that's where we hit another problem of Fallout 76's world design, which is that even if you do try to engage with the world, learn about it, and explore it, the game won't reward you for it. Let me give you an example. When I started playing Fallout 76, I wanted to go and meet some cryptids, because they were new and cool. So the very first town you get to in the game is called Flatwoods, and there's a West Virginian cryptid called the Flatwoods Monster. So naturally, I wanted to find it. Now, if you search the town thoroughly, you can find a pair of audio logs that tell the story of the Flatwoods Monster via a radio play. The story states that a boy from Flatwoods goes camping at a nearby lake, hears a strange sound, follows it to a mine shaft, and then falls into an underground area where he encounters the monster. So I put on my detective hat and started hunting. You see, there's a handful of rivers dotted around the area, but the only thing that can be called a lake is right here, so off I went. And I walked around the entire thing. No campsite, no strange noises, no mines nearby. Alright, back to Flatwood, where I found another lead, a note mentioning a mine shaft. Fine, it's not near water, but it is a mine. And off I went again. No strange noises, no Flatwoods Monster. And where did I eventually find the Flatwoods Monster? Just south of the power plant in the Mire, the other side of the map from Flatwoods. I haven't been able to find definite proof of what causes him to spawn where, but the vast majority of recorded instances I've seen have put him in the Mire. And that's a real shame, because if you've got a Flatwoods Monster in your game, and you leave a trail of clues that hints at its location, then players should be able to find it by following those clues. Otherwise, what's the point of bothering to read the lore and explore the world if we're not going to get anything from it? Back in Fallout 3, some of the biggest and most interesting locations in the game were off the beaten track, where players wouldn't find them unless they went looking. Oasis, for example. In Fallout 76, the opposite is true. The game seems scared that any players might miss something, and thus anything significant is aggressively flagged. Let me give you an example. The first time I was exploring Voltec University, I came across a terminal entry mentioning a student who was doing research into cryptids and had set up a tiny shack in the woods to study them. Reading that added a map marker of the shack. And I was thrilled. This is exactly what I wanted from a Fallout game. I'd read the lore, and now I'd got a cool secret on my map. So eventually, I went off in that direction, and as soon as I got anywhere near the shack, the game generated a new miscellaneous quest for me. Investigate the shack. This appears for all players, even if they have no reason to know the shack is there. In its bid to stop players from missing out on anything, the game has undermined the entire concept of exploring. After all, if that's how it works, why bother? If there's anything there, the game will just let me know for a miscellaneous investigate quest anyway. And this isn't a one-off, it happens a lot. Go anywhere near the Tiger water plant and investigate the trailer will try and pull you to the start of ecological balance. Reach the outskirts of Monongah, and your character will somehow magically know that one particular house has a secret in its basement. On reflection, this might be the most aggressively intrusive quest marker in Fallout history. It's not just showing you exactly where to go, it's pulling you into areas you haven't even visited yet. And this is really, really bad because it makes the game so much less interesting. It's exciting to find a hidden thing that kicks off a quest because it feels like a reward for exploring. One of my favourite moments in Fallout 76 was when I was exploring the mansions around the forest lake, and I found a distinctively dressed corpse in the basement of a random house, completely out of the way, an area that no quest had told me to go to. And that kicked off the Mistress of Mystery questline, which felt great because the only reason I found that body was because I was exploring. I felt rewarded. The game would massively benefit from more stuff like the Mistress of Mystery, in fact. It's a big, interesting, story-driven questline with unique rewards and a really distinct feel to it, thanks to little touches like the secret entrance to the Bat Cave and the AI welcoming you home when you arrive. Sadly, while it's one of the game's high points for me, it's also the exception. The vast majority of locations don't have that sort of cool hidden secret buried inside, and if there's anything of interest nearby, the game will flag it via miscellaneous quest. And that's bad for the game because once people start getting into the habit of expecting points of interest to be flagged to them, then they'll just rush areas, they'll get through the game more quickly, and then they'll stop playing. And part of that is the current state of the events, which are an uneven bunch. I like the more frantic ones like load bearing and one barn at night, but there are some really basic ones mixed in. What you're seeing right now is footage of tea time. It's a very simple event where there are three pipes, creatures are going to attack the pipes, you stop the creatures attacking the pipes. That's literally the whole thing. Now that's pretty simple, but here's the problem. This here's uranium fever, and it's the same thing, but with three uranium processors instead. Meanwhile, this is guided meditation. Same thing, but with speakers. Death Blossoms is the same too, but people launch nukes more regularly than that event triggers, so I couldn't actually get hold of any footage of it. So, if we want Fallout 76 to have a good long lifespan, I think these are the crucial areas. The game needs to be harder, the map needs to be more interesting, individual locations need to be worth exploring, and in general, exploration needs to be rewarded. All of that I think could help people get a lot more immersed in the game, but there's still one missing element to give people a connection to the world, and that is the story. This is a difficult one for me, because I think the storytelling in Fallout 76 is a real mixed bag. As a starting point, it is absolutely 100% possible to tell a compelling story using only environmental details, audio logs, and terminal entries, even if you know that the story ends with everybody being dead. And I know this because one of my favourite stories in all of Fallout history is Vault 11 in New Vegas, which is exactly that. The first thing we find in that quest is a pile of skeletons, a discarded gun, and a tape that makes it perfectly clear that this is the end of the story and everything went to hell. But it's a great story anyway, because it's interesting to figure out exactly what went wrong, how it escalated, could it have been avoided, was it anyone in particular's fault, what went on here? And some of Fallout 76's storytelling is good stuff that contextualizes the world. One thing I really like is the game mostly doesn't overtly state why the world's biomes are as they are. Why is the ash heap active? Why is the Maya overgrown with these strangler vines? Why is the Toxic Valley so polluted? If you want to know, you have to dig through the game story yourself. The reveal of what happened at the ash heap, for instance, is locked in a terminal at the top of a skyscraper in Charleston, and no quest mark will ever direct you to it. It turns out that Hornwright, the CEO of a mining company obsessed with automation, found a way to use auto mining machines to spray particles of whatever they were mining up into the air, where they would be collected by automated drones, which were originally designed to help clean up air quality in general. After the bombs fell, the auto miners kept working, but the drones broke down. And now we have the ash heap. Now that's really cool. So are the political stories of power struggles in the Charleston capital, and lots of other faction-specific lore. So what's the problem? Well, to answer that, we need to talk about storytelling in general. There's an old idea in writing that you should try and figure out if the story you're telling is the most interesting part of the character's life. And if it isn't, maybe you should be telling that story instead. So the story of Fallout 1 is set at the exact moment that the super mutants have first started emerging into the world. Fallout New Vegas opens as a battle to decide the fate of the Mojave, and the NCR itself is about to begin. Fallout 4 starts as tension over the presence of synths is boiling over into violence in the streets, and features the Brotherhood arriving at the end of the first act. These are good moments to set a story. There's conflict, and threat, and faction. But in Fallout 76, the exciting stuff happened over the last 2 decades, and it seems to be mostly done now, which is frustrating because some of Fallout 76's story is really cool and it sounds like a great setup for a Fallout game. You've got a faction made up of first responders, police, firefighters, and paramedics who are just trying to do the right thing and help everybody. But we know they've made mistakes. They've taken on untrained volunteers and got people killed. They've also fired live ammunition at students at some point, though whether the targets were protesters or looters is unclear. They mostly mean well and have plenty of manpower, but they're undersupplied. And then we've got the army, rapidly reformed into a chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, who have eyes on what manpower and resources the responders do possess. Defection goes both ways between the two, but the Brotherhood have the power armor and the big guns, and over time, they're trying to absorb the responders, what they would call an alliance, and the responders would call conscription. On the far side of the mountain, we have the Free States, pre-war isolationist apocalypse preppers who, understandably, were the best prepared for the end of the world, and possessed some of the most advanced tech, as well as good training, but they're massively low in numbers. They recently resettled and fortified Harper's Ferry, and, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Brotherhood are interested in their bunkers, their tech, and their well-trained and intelligent members. But the Free States are fundamentally distrustful of authority, and regard the reformed US Army as exactly that. So they've started to build up a stockpile of weapons. They've seen what's happening to the responders, and they won't let it happen to them, even if it means war against the Brotherhood. And yet the Brotherhood are the only faction strong enough to run convoys between Harper's Ferry and the responders for increasingly well-fortified raider territory, and the Free States need those supplies. And finally, in a secret bunker, the Enclave is watching all of this, operating in secret for a handful of elite embedded agents and assassins. Now that's a great setup for a traditional Fallout game. We've got conflict, faction, you can pick a side and decide which group represents the best bet for the future. And this is what I find frustrating about Fallout 76. It feels like they could have taken this exact map and the exact story they've already written and made a really good single-player campaign out of it. But instead, zombie dragons show up and also there's a zombie plague. And the problem here is when you introduce a literal zombie plague into your story, that kind of gets in the way of the faction drama, which many Fallout players are probably most interested in. The Free States may be distrustful of the Brotherhood's long-term intentions, but, there's literally zombie dragons outside, so suck it up. Which is exactly what happens. It's not even an interesting Vault 11-style tragedy, where it turns out they were their own worst enemies, and if they'd all just worked together, they'd have won. The Brotherhood fights the dragons, and they die. And the responders and the Free States work together and fight the dragons, and they all die too. I mean, I guess technically the Raiders did help, but I'm not sure they'd have turned the tide single-handedly. Anyway, everyone's dead, and now Fallout 76 begins. But it's such an odd choice to set the story there, as well as the well-publicized confirmation there were no human NPCs and everyone was dead, because it means we know what happened to everybody. They died, and we know how they died. The Scorch killed them. The Scorch killed the Brotherhood, and the Raiders, and Flatwood, and Morgantown. I guess the Raiders got a few kills. They murdered Madigan and wiped out Charleston, but, everybody's still dead. Now, the story of how somebody died can be sad, and horrifying, and really effective. The Keller family transcripts are my favourite audio logs in all of Fallout, and some of them in Fallout 76 are really well done. One where a responder has locked herself in a room she can't get out of and just slowly starves to death particularly stands out to me.
I can hear them clawing at the door. I locked myself in the storage closet, but I don't think the door opens from the inside.
But that's the only story Fallout 76 has to tell, and it starts becoming almost comical when the game flashes up the objective to search for survivors or hunt down the source of a radio transmission. In fact, the game actively has 3 different robots say something to the effect of, well, I bet you're surprised I'm a robot, and to be honest, no. After the first 2 times it happened, I wasn't. Part of the problem is we don't know these people. Maria Chavez, one of the responder leaders, comes up maybe 3 times before we find her corpse. Now, I'm sure she was lovely, but I'm not sad because I don't know anything about her. And if the game does try to characterize someone a bit more at length, like Abby or Johnny Marino, I find it hard to get invested in their personal story, knowing full well that they're already dead. So is there a solution to this? Yes, though it's not an easy one and would have worked better if it had been in from the start. But if the fans don't want to put things right with the community, this is perhaps the biggest single thing they could do. I think Fallout 76 would have benefited from being released like a Rockstar game. Single-player campaign up front, and then less structured multiplayer a few weeks later. I think that would have been much more warmly accepted, and with a nice manageable campaign that lone players can play, there would perhaps have been less nerves about ramping up that multiplayer difficulty. Thematically, that could have worked really nicely as well. The campaign's set during the faction tensions, before the Scorch Beasts show up, maybe 10 years before the current events of Fallout 76. It's also a great fit for a single-player campaign built around factions. You can travel around, meet all the different groups, there are full dialogue trees, you join the one you want, even the raiders, there's a proper faction reputation system, the works. And in the end, your faction ends up using a nuke against another faction. The Free States against the Brotherhood, the Responders against the Raiders against the Responders, that sort of thing. But the ending is that the nuke accidentally triggers the emergence of the Scorch Beast, which you could foreshadow, we're talking mysterious earthquakes or whatever, because then the single-player campaign ends on the message, oh no, if only they'd all worked together, and by the way, here's a multiplayer mode set after everyone died, so you can all work together to fix it. The other benefit of this would be then we'd actually know the characters who are all dead, because we worked with them in the single-player campaign. There's an actual connection. You can even track down yourself, your own single-player character. That certainly sounds a lot more fun than following the Overseer as we do in Fallout 76 right now. In fact, in the current version of Fallout 76, you have to hunt down and euthanize the Overseer's husband, a character we know almost nothing about. Wouldn't it be a bit more interesting if you had to hunt down and euthanize a scorched version of your own single-player character? Anyway, that's just a little detail. No matter what form it takes, a single-player campaign could be a really big step in winning back some community goodwill. So, we've spoken a lot about things that are wrong and little ways that we might be able to improve them. Now I want to start pulling some of that together, a vision of what Fallout 76 could be. And to figure out what Fallout 76 should be, I think we need to start right at the very beginning. What is Fallout 76 actually about?
We are on duty. Let's feed them with steel.
Many Fallout games have really benefited from a single, clear objective, and Fallout 1 is perhaps the strongest example of this. You know precisely what you're doing from the moment the game opens. You're after a water jet, and that's reinforced every time you open the pip-boy. Fallout New Vegas opens with you being shot in the head, and then talking to a doctor about how you were shot in the head, and all of the main quests for the first act are dedicated to tracking down the guy that shot you in the head. And Fallout 76 looks like it's going to have precisely that level of focus. So let's just take a quick look-see at the game's introduction.
You must rebuild. Not just walls, not just buildings, but hearts, minds, and ultimately, America itself.
Okay, great. Now let's hear what the Overseer has to say to you inside Vault 76.
Squad, ready for orders.
Right, so we know what we're doing. We're rebuilding America. Now that's a great idea for a Fallout game. Fallout 3 was ultimately about a mission to build crucial infrastructure. Fallout New Vegas is about what society should look like. Fallout 4's Minuteman quest is broadly about building a tiny group of settlements into an alliance that can, together, stand up against external forces that want to take advantage of them. So a game set in the immediate post-war period, building the first infrastructure, founding the first societies, acting like frontier settlers in a post-apocalyptic America, that's an interesting place to take Fallout. And based on all the marketing and the trailers and the game's own introduction, that sounds like it's going to be the core of the game. So you're all ready to rebuild, and then you just don't. The main plot totally ignores rebuilding. You spend your time travelling from one faction's ruined base to the next, but you never rebuild them. Morgantown Airport is never resettled. The AVR Medical Centre is never restored to working order. The Free States bunkers lie silent. The Brotherhood bases and camps remain empty. And this is particularly frustrating because Fallout 76 has perhaps the most impressive architecture in the entire franchise. The monorail elevator, the space station, the water park, multiple fairgrounds. We see these huge broken down things and we want to make them work again. Because you told us to rebuild, and in Fallout you commonly can fix things to make them work, like Project Purity, like Helios 1, like the USS Constitution. But you just can't. You've got these stunningly beautiful giant superstructures, and they don't do anything. And this isn't just a missed opportunity, it's a much deeper problem. And to understand why, we need to dig into what makes architecture in Fallout distinct. Fallout settlements are interesting, I think, because they're built out of things that aren't supposed to be settlements. That makes them interesting to the player and distinct from each other.
Squad
From the
heading for
repurposed
orders.
vehicles that mark the edge of Junktown, to the Unity's repurposed cathedral, the bomb at the heart of Megaton, the ship that houses
We
Rivet
are
City,
on
the
duty.
baseball stadium that became Diamond City. And since Fallout 3, this has become particularly important, because in a 3D Fallout game, it's crucial that settlements have large and easily recognizable profiles to draw in players, like Novak's T-Rex, Prim's roller coaster, Tenpenny Tower being much taller than it strictly needs to be, as the interior only actually includes 4 floors. The smoke from Nipton, Bunker Hill's monument, the Lucky 38 shining in the night. And at the core of this, there are 2 key facts. One, it makes sense to build in and around existing structures. If there are a good number of well-built, still-standing structures available, you would use those rather than build something new from scratch. And 2, if given a choice, players will probably choose to build in and around existing structures because that's how Fallout settlements have always been done, even when we weren't the ones building them. And perhaps most bafflingly of all, Fallout 76 acknowledges this, because that's precisely what all the factions of West Virginia did. The Responders set up bases in the airport and the fire station because they're solid and easily defensible. The Brotherhood of Steel occupying fortified tough old buildings. The Free States chose to resettle Harper's Ferry, specifically because they could use and fortify the existing structures. And yet the moment you're let loose and asked to rebuild America, you do the exact opposite. And that's not by choice, it's because Bethesda have imposed rules that specifically block players from doing the exact thing Fallout has always encouraged us to do, including Fallout 76. In fact, let me tell you a story. The first time I saw the giant satellite dish in Savage Divide, I wanted to climb it, but there was no way to get up there. So I figured I'd just build my own way up there. But not only can you not build under the dish, despite the fact that it will provide protection against the elements, you can't build anywhere near it. The no-camp barrier around the satellite is extremely aggressive. It's like they wanted to make absolutely certain nobody could get on top of it. Even though a camp built under or even on top of a giant satellite dish would be Fallouty and distinctive and fun, it's not allowed. And this means that most camps will be built on empty land with nothing to build around. The vast majority of them end up looking pretty much identical. Simple single or 2-story wooden shacks possessing a selection of workbenches and a bed. This isn't rebuilding America, it's 20-odd hermits scattered across a wasteland. Now this is an annoyance, sure, but it's also a symptom of one of Fallout 76's biggest missed opportunities. So why aren't we rebuilding America? To answer that, let me tell you about something that happened to me. You see, when I heard about Fallout 76, my immediate thought was that I wanted to be a shopkeeper, because it's something I've never been able to do in a Fallout game before. So rather than adventuring to earn money, what if I was an artisan? What if I gathered and crafted and sold things? I've always liked playing Fallout in a pacifist style. This felt like the logical extreme. But when I started playing the game, I immediately ran into problems. Because of the anti-camp barriers, I can't set up a camp in a prominent location, just outside a major quest location where traffic will pass through. So any shop has so few customers that it was just you standing in an empty room 99% of the time, even if we overlook the fact that the number of players in any session is far too low to realistically create any form of service economy. But even if I could find a spot where I could slap down a camp extremely nearby to a major location, and even if there was a significant increase in the number of people allowed in a single session, I can guarantee that it would still have almost no traffic, because the map simply isn't designed to have any form of central hub. On the contrary, the world seems to be intentionally decentralized. There's no resource gathering hub because junk is spread around everywhere, and there are over 20 workshops, all with multiple resources, and they can only be held by one person at a time anyway. There's no need to gather around any of them. There's no shopping hub because there are more automated vendor bots scattered across the map than I can count, and in a world where most quests are automatically generated without a specific quest giver, there's not even a hub where people frequently visit to acquire or turn in those quests. And as a result of that, and it's hard to tell whether this is intentional or not, every settlement is a ghost town. Flatwoods was bustling just after launch, but these days it's deserted unless a new player happens to be passing through. And I guess you could argue this is good. The Fallout game should be a harrowing, lonely experience peeking through the silent ruins of humanity. And that's definitely a part of it, but games need contrast too. Earlier I was discussing this as a weakness in Fallout 76's storytelling. When every story ends the same way, and then Scorch killed us all, the stories get more predictable and less interesting. We need variety. Give us Desolate Waste, sure, but we need moments of bustling life too. The hub, Megaton, the Strip, Diamond City. The existence of a living town is important because the contrast makes the lonely moments in the wasteland stand out more. And here we come back to the theme of rebuilding. Was the intention that we would be the ones to build the towns? That you just can't because of one huge glaring issue with the game.
Squad
No
ready
one
for
will ever
orders.
build a successful town in
Get your
Fallout
weapons
76 in
ready.
its current form because nobody needs a town. We've touched on this briefly already, but this is where the abundance of survival supplies and of the tools to produce them starts really hurting the game. You see, everything you need, workstations, cooking stations, bed, shelter, crops, water, it's all gifted to you in the first hour of the game in the tutorial missions of Flatwood. Now just stop and really think about that for a second. In a multiplayer online game with survival elements, any lone player will have the capability to be comfortably and entirely self-sufficient within an hour of starting the game. You will never need anybody else again for survival. The only thing you do need is someone to buy your excess stuff. So luckily, there are guaranteed robot stores available all over